Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to This Week in FCPA, Episode 127, for the week ending November 2, 2018, the We Are the Champions edition. First, a word from our sponsor, Affiliated Monitors. Founded in 2004, Affiliated Monitors provides professional, independent integrity monitoring and ethics and compliance assessments nationally and internationally and across almost all industries. With its knowledge of effective ethics and compliance programs and cultures, Affiliated Monitors is respected for its work as the corporate monitor on matters ranging from multinational corporations to small and mid-sized companies and even individuals. Having served in over 600 monitorships, no one has more experience as an independent monitor than the team at Affiliated Monitors. For more information on how an independent monitor can help improve your company's ethics and compliance programs, visit our sponsor, Affiliated Monitors, at www.affiliatedmonitors.com. In today's episode, we take a look at some of the compliance lessons from the Boston Red Sox World Series Championship, the failures and successes from the University of Maryland and their termination of their disgraced football coach. We look at Cognizant, who set aside money for an FCPA settlement, and Wal-Mart settling a shareholder action over its FCPA investigation. GIR announces the top investigative firms and doles out awards in its fourth annual awards dinner. There's an article on reputational hit impacting the bottom line. Matt Kelly asks, is Michigan State serious about compliance? More on the ongoing Penev ASA corruption scandal and the 1MDB scandal breaks with indictments and guilty pleas. Leslie Caldwell talks about compliance being critical to the Department of Justice and a sting operation involving the FCPA in Haiti. We take a look at upcoming FCPA Masterclass training that I'm putting on and the NAVEX Global Virtual Ethics and Compliance Conference. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist. This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to This Week in FCPA, Episode 127 for the week ending November 2, 2018. The Queen song, We Are the Champions. Edition. The Boston Red Sox thrashed the LA Dodgers, bringing back home the trophy to Boston for the fourth time in 15 years. What's it like to support such a lovable loser? Fortunately, we were going to answer that question because, as always, we have Mr. Monitors Jay Rosen. Jay, welcome.
Thank you, Tom. And as you always refer to me as a homer, and Boston is the home of Affiliated Monitors, I think everything ties together on this first Friday in November. And very happy to be a world champ. You know what the feeling was last year, and I'm going to exploit it for the next 360 plus days as long as I can.
So, Jay, we had, turns out, quite a fun-filled compliance and ethics week. So why don't we just jump right into it? We're going to talk about the Red Sox and the World Series, but why don't you maybe hold that one till the end so it gives you a chance to expound a little bit further. But from the sporting world, we had what I thought was going to be just a horrible story. It turned out that while not a very big ending, at least a better ending, and that revolved around the Board of Regents of the Systems of the University of Maryland universities earlier this week had reinstated Coach DJ Durkin, who, for those who may not remember, there was a player who had died in a workout, and Coach Durkin and the strength coach resigned. Coach Durkin was suspended pending an investigation. The investigation concluded that although not a toxic atmosphere, it was a bad atmosphere for this coach. But interestingly, the Board of Regents actually blamed the university president for not supporting the coach and told the university president that even though he did want to fire him, if he did fire him, the university president would be fired. I wrote a excoriating blog post, which I was going to post on the FCPA blog, but overnight, the ruckus and row was so large and so vociferous that the president, President Lowe of the University of Maryland, the next day fired the coach. And the vociferous voices were wide-ranging, from the governor of the state of Maryland to the student body president to the players. Social media outrage just poured out. And so the coach was fired the next day. It was a really interesting series of lessons, one on the role of a board, two on what is culpability and when do you, as the captain of the ship, have to stand up and take responsibility for something that might come up under your watch. So we certainly we're going to be watching this to see how it may all pan out. But frankly, I thought it was the appropriate remedy to terminate the coach.
My question is just from I guess, medical perspective. Why do we always hear about these tragedies? I mean, shouldn't coaches and their staff know enough that if you're an over 300-pound person, you've got all that gear strapped on and you're doing workouts in 90 to 100 degrees in humidity, shouldn't they be ready for these telltale times? And maybe they're just pushing the players too hard.
So that was one of the things that offended me the most about this, Jay. Having grown up playing football, basketball, track, and baseball in the South, heat stroke is something that you're always cognizant of. Junior high coaches were cognizant of it, and they always kept water or ice or something nearby if someone did have that problem. The issue here was the head trainer was running these workout sessions, and apparently they did not only not prepare for such an eventuality, but actually thought the player was dogging it, so they forced him to do actually more work. So lots of some basic health and safety was ignored right out of the box.
Wow, it's certainly a tragedy. Next up, Cognizant has set aside $28 million for an FCPA settlement, and this came out in their recent earnings call, which said, as a reminder, in September 2016, the company voluntarily notified the DOJ and SEC of potential FCPA violations relating to facilities in India. During 2016, they recorded out-of-pocket corrections to $4 million of potentially improper payments. Discussion for DOJ and the SEC has progressed to a point to give some visibility, and they have now set aside $28 million in their financials for Q3. So this looks like something that, when you hear a company put away a reserve like that, it means that there usually is a resolution right around the corner. What also was interesting was the company had previously said it fired or demoted individuals involved with the FCPA violations, and 3 days before publicly disclosing the FCPA investigations in 2016, the company's former president, Gordon Coburn, resigned and was replaced internally by Rajiv Mehta, formerly head of the business IT division. So I think that's the information we have. It's pretty much bare bones on this one. Tom, anything to add on it?
No, I guess we're just going to have to wait and see what the resolution is, whether it'll be a declination with disgorgement, will it be DPA, MPA, or other. So then we can really see kind of what the lessons to be learned from the compliance perspective may be or may have been.
All right. Why don't you tell us what's happening with our friends in Bentonville?
So Wal-Mart settled one of the outstanding shareholder class action suits for $160 million relating to the U.S. government's ongoing investigation of the FCPA violations stemming out of their Mexico operation. It was interesting, and it was bookended, we found out today, by another shareholder lawsuit that had been previously dismissed that the shareholder class is trying to get reinstated in the Second Circuit. But so it's not clear which of the shareholder lawsuits was settled. Nevertheless, $160 million is a far above nuisance value that we've seen in FCPA shareholder actions. And the question I think probably on all of our minds, Jay, is what does this mean in terms of a final settlement for Wal-Mart of its massive FCPA enforcement action? What will the form of that settlement take? I don't think it would be a declination with disgorgement, but we had obviously Petrobras receiving an NPA, so that possibly could be on the table. A DPA could be on the table, or other resolution. So if this moves the ball forward on Wal-Mart, I think that's certainly a positive statement. Since 2012, Wal-Mart has spent $892 million on internal investigations and related compliance improvements. It has previously said, following up on your point on Cognizant, that it would set aside $283 million in anticipation of a likely settlement. So perhaps there's a settlement of the long-standing Wal-Mart case, now 6 years or 5.5 years, 6.5 years, I guess, ongoing. And if we can get this one resolved, it's one of the big ones. And hopefully there'll be numerous lessons which can be learned from the settlement documents as well.
Highly anticipated, to say the least.
To say the very least.
Next up, we have something that's very interesting from our folks at GIR, Global Investigations Review. And we're going to link to it in the show notes. Unfortunately, it's behind the firewall, so you need to be a member of it. But what they do is they do a yearly ranking of the top 30, top 40, and top 100 FCPA and white-collar investigations firms. And what they do is take a lot of different data points. Sometimes the best work that is done by outside counsel never sees the light of day because the client does not get charged. There is no penalty paid. But a lot of these matters we've read about in the papers, and GIR does a real good job of following, who was involved in the latest cases, who becomes, monitors and things like that. So what they look at here is they look at matters and they try to say, rank them as to whether it's a corporate internal investigation or if it's internal investigation jurisdiction. So they look at that. Other factors they take into effect are who's who legal nominees, the number of partners that are in the practice, the global spread of where these partners are located, whether or not any of these are former government enforcers, with the revolving door being a little bit more quicker here in the U.S. than the U.K. and elsewhere. That still gives the law firms insight into the latest thinking of the government. As I said before, monitors, travel, clients. And in the top 10, we saw some movement. Gibson Dunn reclaimed the top spot from Wilmer Hale. The top 10 are Gibson Dunn, Hogan's Lovell, Wilmer Hale, Skadden Arps, Debevoise and Plimpton, Baker McKenzie, Herbert Smith Freehills, Sidley Austin, Quinn Emanuel, and Clifford Chance. So it's a nice mixture of, I guess it's really hard to say now that you could either classify them as U.S. firms with global reach or global firms, and then some Magic Circle firms too. And one other honorable mention coming in at 21 is Miller and Chevalier. This is a single location firm in D.C., but we've talked about it numerous times in the past. Our friend Matt Ellis heads up their Latin American group, which is one of the best in the business. So get a hand on this. This is being helpful for in-house counsel. God forbid you have a situation, you have some of these folks not only on speed dial, but you should know them right now because they could be the answer to a big problem if it shows up in your doorstep.
So next up, Jay, we had thought a really interesting article from a reporter I had previously not seen in the compliance space named Min-Ki Sun on the Wall Street Journal Risk and Compliance Journal. And in this article, the reporter or the author took a look at the loss of trust that companies causes companies to have actual dollar losses. So reputational damage can lead directly to loss in revenue. Now, the report by Accenture said that there were over 100 half the companies analyzed reported a drop as much as $180 billion total on a worldwide basis. Unfortunately, that is aggregated, so we don't have the individual losses by companies, but it certainly points to something that we've talked about, and I think a lot of other compliance commentators are talking about, which is reputational damage leads directly to a loss on the bottom line. And it affected companies a wide variety of industries, banking, utilities, travel, transportation. As social media amplifies all forms of news, whether it be political, sports, business, or other, that the cost could be much, much greater. And companies are finally recognizing reputational risks are material and disclosing them in their financial statements, and really have done so for some few years. But as social media becomes more and more pronounced, this is something that boards of directors are going to have to start considering. Certainly, the compliance profession and compliance officers help this situation with a robust compliance program. And I think this is only going to drive compliance more to the center of business and require a greater operationalization of your compliance program going forward.
And we kind of have a corollary to that we've been speaking about since the conference last week, is that ethical companies are better run companies and more profitable. I think that would be the positive side of the fact that you don't lose your reputation because you run a clean company. Next up, we have something from Matt Kelly over at Radical Compliance. And once again, Michigan State reorganizes its, and basically in June they set up, created to deal with some of the ethics and compliance lapses that came from the USA Gymnastics in the Larry Nassar case. And then basically the chairman of the school now has come back and said that they have a separate office of ethics, risk and management and compliance, and that they are now going to combine this under audit and risk and compliance. And a woman named Marilyn Tarrant, Michigan State audit since 2015, will oversee the new office. So Matt is hoping that they finally have got this right. One of the good things is that Ms. Tarrant will report directly to the board, which will give her a clear shot to raise any issues and problems. And Matt's worry is that the arrangement does bring some clarity, but for an institution as large as Michigan State, 59,000 students, $1.3 billion budget, 596 research grants, compliance should be an office unto itself, given how many concerns the compliance director will need to address. Tom, you're a former alumnus. Any thoughts on your alma mater?
So full disclosure, I'm a Michigan State grad, so I'm vested in with a lot of interest in this. I'm very disturbed by this, Jay. I think it really continues what I see as the current interim president, John Engler, just really does not get it. And he doesn't understand what compliance is. He thinks it's simply setting out the rules and regulations, and he doesn't understand that it's all about culture. And he has continually made cultural missteps, and I think this is one more. Matt is not as forlorn in hope as I am, but we'll just have to see how it plays out. Matt notes that several universities and indeed not-for-profit companies have this structure as well, so perhaps it will work at Michigan State. But given how the number of missteps and lack of transparency that the university has engaged in so far, I'm not as hopeful as Matt is.
All right. So one of my favorite global oil companies is Penev ASA. What's happening with our friends in Venezuela?
So we had a couple of interesting guilty pleas and sentencing this week around Penev ASA, the Venezuelan national oil company. I think most of our listeners, Jay, are aware of the ongoing scandal, what the Department of Justice has been prosecuting. There was corruption in their supply chain. Several former procurement officers at Penev ASA have pled guilty to money laundering charges. Here we had a Texas gentleman, Ivan Alexis Gudez, also pled guilty to money laundering charges. So it's going to be, he has not yet been sentenced, so it's going to be interesting to see what his sentence is. But the second noteworthy news item was that a former Julius Baer executive was sentenced to 10 years for his role in the money laundering. Now, this was a fellow named Matthias Krull, who was a German national who lived in Panama. He had pled guilty in August to a count of conspiracy for money laundering, but he was a banker in this. And he was a banker in this, not on the same bribery scheme that Mr. Gudez was involved in, which was payment of bribes to secure contracts. This was outright theft. This was fraud by certain high-ranking Penev ASA officials to steal up to $1.2 billion, or I suppose embezzle would be the more appropriate legal term, $1.2 billion from the company and get it out of Penev ASA and paid into Swiss bank accounts. And that was Mr. Krull's role in this. So in addition to the bribery and corruption to obtain contracts, we had outright embezzlement from Penev ASA. I've been following Penev ASA in this story for some time, and the company has just been decimated. It is producing less oil than it did literally 40 years ago. It's about 1/10 the value of what it was. And for the country of Venezuela, this has decimated the country as well. It's in continuous economic crisis. The regime, Maduro regime, is very antithetical to our current U.S. regime. So there's lots of conflicts and potential conflicts, but without the cash flow from Venezuela, which frankly has the world's largest oil reserves behind Saudi Arabia. And if they lose Citgo as an asset and have only the limited resources of the currently producing Penev ASA properties, it's going to be very, very difficult. So when you have this type of outright theft, I think it really speaks to an entire culture of corruption, not simply by functionaries in the procurement department, but high-level executives were also doing everything they could to steal from Penev ASA. So a new wrinkle in an old case, and we'll just have to see where the corruption takes us.
All righty. Next up, we've got a couple articles, one from Harry Casson over at the FCPA blog, and another one, I guess Sam Rubenfeld's just been writing about each company every day. And basically, prosecutors charge a businessman in a bribery case that involved a sting. An American businessman was charged on Tuesday for his alleged role in a plot to bribe senior government officials in Haiti for access to a proposed $84 million port development project. Roger Richard Bonsi, 74, or Bonsi rather, a dual U.S. and Haitian citizen, planned to launder funds through a nonprofit to pay bribes, the DOJ said. Bonsi, who lives in Madrid, was charged with one count of conspiracy to violate the FCPA and the Travel Act, and one count of violating the Travel Act, and one count of conspiracy to commit money laundering. He was working with a co-conspirator, Joseph Baptiste, who was charged previously in October of 2007. The $84 million Mole Saint Nicolas project included construction of multiple cement factories, a shipping vessel recycling station, and an international transshipment station with numerous slips for shipping vessels, a power plant, a petroleum depot, and tourist facilities. So what's interesting about this, Tom, and I think you can give us a little context, is that this actually involved a sting operation. And the last time we had the government doing a sting operation in the FCPA arena involved the arms business, and that was that called Sure Shot?
Gun sting.
Gun sting, yeah.
Oh.
So I think that was around the first time we met in D.C. You were actually in town for those hearings, and I think I met you and Mike Volkov for the first time.
So, yes, a very rare sting case. The government really took a spanking and those they were not able to secure any convictions and ended up dismissing all of the defendants who took the matter to trial. So it once again shows that the government, though, will use all of the tools in its arsenal. And if you have a propensity to engage in criminal activity and you sniff around, the government can certainly find you and get you, ensnare you in a sting operation. So we had some thoughts from Leslie Caldwell and Christopher Ting about compliance. You want to tell us about those, Jay?
Yep. So this is in response to the Winkowski memo that came out for about a couple weeks ago. It's entitled "The Selection of Monitors in Criminal Division Matters," and basically it brought a clarification to the mechanism on how to select monitors, but it also talked about how that they actually see a decline in the role of monitors going forward. Basically, it supersedes the 2009 Department Memorandum on the selection of monitors, but still retains the 2008 memorandum, which is known as the Morford Memo. Basically, the criminal division will consider whether to require monitors going forward, and the factors that it will take into effect are whether the underlying misconduct was a result of inadequate compliance or internal controls, the pervasiveness of the misconduct with the organization and or involvement of senior management, improvements made since the underlying misconduct of the company's compliance program, and the likelihood that any remedial efforts would prevent future occurrences of the underlying conduct. So, a couple things that was also mentioned in the memo was that Wei Chen, who was the former ethics and compliance guru who left the DOJ in 2017, Winkowski has specifically said that they don't see themselves replacing that position, and they want to go ahead and hire more prosecutors who have ethics and compliance background. And in the article, Caldwell and Ting question whether or not that is really the best way to help companies going ahead, especially when there's so much different specificity involved in compliance for different industries. So they're hopeful that the one thing that's going to really help companies, and this is my key takeaway, is that an assessment of a company's compliance program will remain a key priority for the criminal division, both in assessing whether criminal charges are warranted and then whether or not a monitor is appropriate. So I think the big takeaway is that you still need to make sure that your internal ethics and compliance posture is good, and that should take care of your problems going forward. And if you haven't updated your ethics and compliance program in the last several years, in light of this latest memo, it might be an opportune time for you to take a look and see where you're at vis-a-vis other people in your industry.
So, Jay, we have saved, other than, of course, We Are the Champions discussion, the biggest news of the week in the bribery and corruption and FCPA world to the last. And that was the indictments released actually yesterday against a ex-Goldman banker, Roger Ning, and J. Lo around the 1MDB scandal, and the guilty plea by ex-Goldman banker Tim Leissner to FCPA and money laundering violations. This was when you're on the front page of both the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, I can only say it's a big story. So the huge multi-billion-dollar theft of money from MDB is hopefully moving toward sort of judicial resolution. Both the Times and the Journal point out the difficult position Goldman Sachs is now in, because they were paid over $600 million in fees for the 1MDB transactions they were involved in. They were bond offerings. We have a executive director, we have a managing director, and we have other employees involved from Goldman Sachs. So it's really not going to be clear what the result might be for Goldman. But As of yesterday, a stunning guilty plea by Tim Leissner, the Goldman partner in charge of the 1MDB relationship. He was pled guilty, agreed to forfeiture of some $44 million in profits he made personally. His one of his direct assistants, Mr. Ning, that's spelled NG, was indicted, and then J. Lo also indicted. Lo is reportedly hiding in China, and Ning was arrested in Singapore. So lots to really think about and talk about from the 1MDB perspective, and something that certainly we will continue to watch. So we have come to the part that I know you've been waiting for, which was where you cue in, we are the champions of the world. But more importantly, what do the champions of the world have to tell us and lessons to give to the compliance practitioners of the world, Jay?
Great question, Tom, and I'm glad we saved this for last. Your colleague at Compliance Week, Joe Mont, took a look at the managerial styles of the Dodgers, Dave Roberts, and the World Series champion manager of the Red Sox, Alex Cora. And although there has been a popularity of using analytics for the last, 10 years or so, dating back to Michael Lewis's Moneyball, the point that Joe seems to make is that Roberts was just 100% going by the analytics, and either did not choose to trust his gut, or, as they're saying on sports radio here in LA, he wasn't able to make those choices. Whereas Cora was able to factor in and using analytics, but deciding that, yes, there would be a favorable outcome if he brought in a certain hitter against a certain pitcher at the right time of the game. So that's my takeaway from Joe. And it seems like, with respects to Adam Turtletop, that the Dodgers have 2 years in a row, last year to your A.J. Hinch-led Astros, and this year's to the Red Sox. And, I think either of their current bench coaches will probably be highly considered to take on managing other teams. But I definitely believe that, just kind of like we talk about in an ethics and compliance and an operationals perspective, there is a way to glean certain analytics, but the analytics alone do not tell you which way to go, that you need to take your common sense, your past experience, and you have to use all that information, and then based on a decision, move forward. So that's my takeaway from Joe's thing. And, I think it worked out pretty well for the Bo Sox this year.
I think it did, Jay. But Jay, I had a lesson for compliance officers in a little bit different direction. And that comes from Dodger manager Dave Roberts. And unfortunately, this is you're going to have to learn something from the negative here. But as you probably recall, in Game 4, the Dodgers were up 4-0, and they had a pitcher throwing a one-hitter. I think it was Andrew Hill, but I may have his first name wrong. And at the start of the 6th inning, Hill tells manager Roberts something along the lines of, "I'm getting a little tired. Watch me while I'm out there." So the first batter up gets a single, and Roberts goes to the mound. And as Roberts reaches the mound, this is Dodger manager Dave Roberts, Hill hands him the ball and walks off. There was lots of questions about why Roberts would remove a pitcher who had thrown a one-hitter to that point and had a 4-0 lead in the 6th. And it turns out all of this was either a miscommunication or an outright mistake. And the miscommunications were multiple. First of all, Roberts thought that Hill was telling him he was gassed and he was about to run out of gas. So that was Roberts' misinterpretation of Hill's telling him to watch him while he was on the mound. But more importantly, when Roberts went to the mound, he said he was not going out there to change pitchers. He was going out to talk to Hill to find out how he was feeling and to talk about pitching to the next Red Sox batter. Now, for those who watch baseball, you get 2 visits to the mound per pitcher per inning. And the first visit is always the pitching coach. And it's either to do that, to talk to the pitcher, see how he's doing, see how he's feeling, talk to the infielders, to the catcher, or give the bullpen a little time to warm up. The second visit is always the manager, and the manager is the one who makes the change. And as the manager walks out, he raises his left arm or right arm to indicate which reliever he wants to come into the game if there are left-handers and right-handers warming up. Well, Roberts, this was the first visit to the mound. So as Roberts was walking out, Hill assumed because it was the manager, he was being pulled. Now, Roberts did not raise his arm, so he gave no signal of who he wanted. And you very rarely see a pitcher put his hand out with the ball to give to the manager. Occasionally you see that, but almost always it's the manager who reaches his hand out to get the ball to communicate to the pitcher, I'm sorry, but I'm pulling you, whatever, or perhaps good job, I'm pulling you. So Roberts thought he was going out to talk. Hill thought Roberts was coming out to pull him. Hill gave Roberts the ball. At that point, Roberts has no choice. He cannot keep Hill in the game. Hill said, "I'm gone," and begins to walk off the mound. So several missed communications, several missed signals, several nuances between pitcher and manager that were missed. And that led to, and certainly contributed to, the Dodgers falling apart and losing that game because the Red Sox completely destroyed the Dodger bullpen who came in thereafter. So I found that to be a really interesting I don't know if it was cultural failure, but it was certainly a communications failure. And the message I would give to a compliance officer is be very careful and watch the signals that you're being given, and also watch the signals that you are giving. If you walk out to the mound, somebody may think you're coming out there to replace them.
Good stuff, Tom. Coming up, you've got a masterclass and some other educational opportunities. Why don't you share that with our listeners?
Sure. Jonathan Marks and I are putting on a masterclass in New York on November 12th and 13th. I've got information and registration details. November 8th, NAVEX is putting on its Ethics and Compliance virtual conference. I had an opportunity to learn a little bit more about that, and that's going to be an excellent virtual conference. It's complimentary. You do not have to be a product user of NAVEX. Check it out on the NAVEX site. 2 things I'd like to just mention, Jay, is I rolled out a new podcast this week, the Daily Compliance News, or Coffee and Compliance with Tom is probably what it should be called, but I give every one of our listeners a 3-minute news summary update each morning at 7. It posts at 7 a.m. So if you want to have a cup of coffee and check out the compliance news. And then I had a lot of fun with another week of the intersection of Sherlock Holmes and compliance in my podcast series, Adventures in Compliance. I took a look at a study in Scarlet and a CCO exercising power, the Valley of Fear and using virtual teams for your compliance program across the globe, the Hounds of the Baskervilles, and how to have innovation in 90 days. Then I looked at innovation more generally through the context of the sign of 4. And finally, posting today will be some thoughts of Sherlock Holmes as a teacher and how you can incorporate those into your compliance program. So, Jay, any final thoughts before you take us home?
Well, in line with your "We Are the Champions," I'm very much looking forward to the Queen Freddie Mercury movie, which is coming out this weekend, Bohemian Rhapsody. So maybe at some point it might enter into our conversation. On behalf of Tom Fox, the compliance evangelist, and myself, Jay Rosen, Mr. Monitor, we'd like to thank you for joining us for This Week in FCPA episode 127 for the week ending November 2nd, the aforementioned We Are the Champion edition. Thanks for listening and have a wonderful weekend.
This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of This Week in FCPA. I hope you'll join us again next week where Jay and I wrap up some of the week's top compliance and ethics stories. If you have any questions, you can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. You can email Jay at jrosen@affiliatedmonitors.com. This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.